Managing the healing chamber post-grafting is a very difficult process, and this is one of the things that can be a big barrier for people that are new to grafting. The purpose of the healing chamber is to raise the humidity and cut down the light so that the scion tissue does not need that root system while that graft union fuses. So what we want to do is slow down that transpiration stream of the plant and basically make it so it doesn't need its root system. In order to raise the humidity, you have to use plastic to keep it in. And that can become problematic, especially in a greenhouse that's getting sun. So one of the big things to keep in mind is that these healing chambers will become very hot very quickly, especially if you're not taking proper measurements in order to keep the direct sun off of them. For day-to-day management, it's important to check on those plants at least 2 to 3 times a day, and more than that, like 5 to 6 times a day is probably even better. And when we check on them, we ventilate them. We'll actually open up the chamber, allow some fresh air to come in so that the plants get good oxygen, and that also allows it to cool the chamber off as well. And if you're having issues with the chamber getting warm, it's important to ventilate it pretty often. When you check on the plants, you mainly just want it to look and see how wilty they are. If they're incredibly wilty and it looks like they've been through an issue where it's gotten too hot in there, then you may want to turn a humidifier on in order to raise the humidity back up and get them to pop up. But other than that, there's really not a whole lot to look for other than just checking on the plants and making sure that you ventilate them when you do that. We'll oftentimes also have to refill the humidifiers when we're using them, and typically that's about once per day, although sometimes our humidifiers will last a couple of days. The plants will spend about 7 to 9 days in the healing chamber. And during the course of these 7 to 9 days, the plant is required to regrow callus tissue on the stem, which will then become vascular tissue within the bundles of the plant. Now, the thing that is tricky about this is you have to be able to allow that scion to live by raising the humidity, but you also have to provide some light for those plants as well so that they can start to photosynthesize and get what they need in order to reform that graft union. Typically, the process takes about 7 to 9 days, and during this time, you want to slowly reintroduce light and also reduce the humidity. We'll typically leave our plants in the complete dark for about 48 hours. And when I say complete dark, what we usually do is we have a piece of 50% shade cloth in the greenhouse where our healing chamber is, and then we have 2 pieces of 50% shade cloth over top of the chamber. And that keeps it nice and dark in there, and those plants are nice and happy, even though they don't have functioning root systems yet. Then what we'll do after 2 days of dark, we'll start to reintroduce light. So we'll typically peel off 1 layer of shade cloth at that point and allow a little bit of light in. Then on the next day, which would be day 4, we might take off that second layer as well. Or you can push that to day 5, is okay. One of the things you want to do when managing the chamber is anytime that you make a change, either by removing shade cloth or changing the plastic or turning off the humidifier, you want to be sure to check on those plants pretty quickly, if within an hour or 2 after you've made that change, in order to check and make sure that the plants have gone through that transition appropriately. The other thing that we'll do about day 4 or day 5 is start to reduce the humidity. Now, we find that you do a little bit better if you introduce light and get first and get the plants established to some indirect light, and then start to reduce the humidity. So the first thing that we'll do is we will turn off the humidifier. We're starting to find that humidifiers certainly aren't necessary for these healing chambers. They make life a little bit easier because when you set up the healing chamber, you can turn on the humidifier and you can instantly raise the humidity very quickly. We've also found that if you put a little bit of water in the bottom of the healing chamber, then the humidity will raise pretty quickly on its own. And on a day-to-day basis, this is very sufficient for the plants. So we'll typically turn off the humidifier either on day 1 or day 2, or certainly by day 3 or day 4. And then about day 4 or day 5, we'll start to try and reduce the humidity as best as we can. One way that we can do this is by putting vents into the healing chamber. So we'll actually put vents along the top of the chamber, either by cutting a slit in the plastic or by cutting small circles across the top of the plastic. That will decrease the humidity slightly. The other thing that you can do is start to vent the plants more often at this stage in the game too, or you can raise the sides of the plastic in order to allow a little bit of that humidity out, but still keep the direct wind from your ventilation fans off of the plants. That's also a very effective way to do this. Now, by day 7, you really should have very little covering on the chamber. At this point, the plants either will be living or the grafts will have failed. One word of caution that I'd let you know is not to leave the plants in the dark in the high humidity conditions for too long, because they do have to go through that transition process. And if they're very happy in that chamber with high humidity and low light, then they'll never be forced to produce that graft union and successfully become a grafted plant. Another thing that we found is that if you leave the humidity too high for too long, then you can start to get adventitious roots forming from the scion, especially if they've gone through any type of stressful event like high heat conditions. And typically this isn't a huge problem, because once you lower the humidity down, those roots will just suberize and become non-functional. Occasionally what will happen is those roots will actually grow down into the clip and push the scion off of the rootstock, eliminating your graft union, and this can be a big problem. So if you're seeing issues with adventitious roots coming from the scion, don't be afraid to cut down that humidity a little bit, especially towards the end of the cycle after 4 to 5 days.